Welcome to Rise to Lead, the podcast where heart-driven leaders come together to inspire and innovate. They will share actionable tips and insights that help you lead your team more successfully, advance your career or business as a leader, achieve greater impact, and experience deeper fulfillment. I'm your host, Regina Huber, guiding you through deep conversations about leadership that's rooted in service, freedom, and the desire to leave a positive mark on the world. Welcome to this episode of Rise to Lead, in which we're going to focus on communication, such an important topic. I'm delighted to introduce to you my dear friend and today's guest, Sifu Rafael Gomez. Welcome to the show, Sifu Rafael.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure and I'm super excited.
Well, I'm saying the same. It's such a pleasure to finally welcome you to my show, Sifu Rafael, because I've been on so many of your shows. I don't know how many. I stopped counting at some point. So thanks for having me on those in the past and maybe some more in the future.
Absolutely.
Let me quickly introduce you to our audience who don't know you in a little more detail, and then I'm going to let you talk about yourself as well. Sifu Rafael is an entrepreneur, founder of Speaking Prowess, and host of 6 live shows. Wow. Sifu Rafael is a master instructor and speaker who is passionate about empowering individuals to reach their full potential. As a solutions expert and executive coach, Sifu brings years of experience to the table, guiding clients towards their goals with clarity and purpose. Clarity is such an important word in this context. Head instructor at Mark's Martial Arts. That's another role that he has, an extremely important one in his brick and mortar business, where he combines his expertise in martial arts with leadership development. Bravo, bravo. Bienvenido. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's get this conversation started, shall we, Sifu?
Sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Sifu Rafael, in just a few sentences, tell us who you are, how you work with your clients in your different businesses, and what you have in store for the near future, because I know there's a big project in the works.
Absolutely. Let's consider we all have something inside of us, and many of us don't even know how to bring it out or bring it forth to either our community, even in our own family, or in our business. So for me, I've always been an entrepreneur. Even as a little kid, I used to, before I've been coaching since I was a little kid, because I used to go from one high school that I used to attend and go to a different high school and teach. So I used to teach gymnastics, but I also used to volunteer and teach swimming to people who didn't know how to swim early in the morning before school started.
Wow.
So about an hour before school started. So for me, it was always about how can I empower or actually have somebody, not, I can't empower them, they have to empower themselves, but how can they see the awesomeness that's inside of them?
Yeah, you guided them to empower themselves. I love that. Yes, well, that's really, really cool. So in your businesses, because you have the martial arts business, right, school, and then you have other businesses that we're going to talk about in more detail as well. But so how do you work with your clients there?
On every business that I touch upon, it's always about how can I make their lives better. I think for me, that is my goal. So when I realize my purpose is to help as many people as I possibly can. And for some reason, I'm not going to say luck, but I'm going to say drive. The drive for me to help other people has allowed me to be successful in all of my businesses. Therefore, every time that I have somebody in front of me, a client, my initial and if we're talking about heart-centered is, how can I help you? How can I make your life better?
I love that. I love that. Yes. Yes. And we all do it in our own way. And that's the beauty of it. That's
Right.
the beauty of entrepreneurship also, or it's also the beauty of being a leader in a corporate setting. It doesn't really matter. We all make a difference in our very, very own way.
Mhm.
And we're going to talk more about that. But if you just quickly want to mention your next big project, because I know it's coming.
Yes, and actually, I am thrilled that you're part of it. It's called Speaking Prowess, and that one is based on communication, how we communicate, whether it's on a personal level, with our family, with our friends, but most importantly, in business. How do we communicate with clarity? And you talked about clarity earlier and how important it is. But without clarity in business, we're going to have a lot of problems. Right. So clarity to me is super important.
Absolutely. It also has to do with transparency, with authenticity. It's all related. And
Mhm,
I just posted something the other day where I said clarity comes from coherence of mind and heart.
mhm.
And it's, of course, if we want to convey clarity in our message, in our leadership, then we must first gain that clarity for ourselves, because
Absolutely.
all leadership starts with self, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Now, I want to quickly ask you about your work with children, because you, as a young kid, were already a leader of sorts.
mhm.
And so, how do you awaken that leadership potential in the children you work with at the martial arts company, for example?
Well, here's the cool thing. I don't help them from a pedestal. What I
Mhm.
mean by that is I get down to their level because otherwise, one of the things that I need to be able to build with them is trust. And that goes with anyone I speak with, whether they're an adult, a senior citizen, or they're a child. Trust is the most important thing. So I don't, if a 5-year-old comes up to me, they look up and they're like, "Oh my God, he's like so tall." And that's intimidating for someone. So I get down on my knee and I look them straight in the eye. So now I've taken that fear away from them. When we see someone, for example, a lot of people are afraid of celebrities. I don't know why, because they're awed by them, right? They're like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing that I'm in your presence. No, for me, it's I am amazed that I'm in your presence, and no matter who you are. So that's how we have to build that trust. Eyes, right? The way we can talk to somebody, don't be afraid to look in their eyes. Even though some cultures, if you look at them in the eyes too much, it's not good. So you have to understand who you're speaking with as well.
Absolutely, cultural differences that need to be respected, or else you might get the opposite result of what you intend to get.
Exactly.
Yes, that is an important point, of course. And putting yourself at the same level or in the same uh, let's call it maybe also even in the same mental setting
Mhm.
as other people is an important leadership skill, because we need to know who we're talking to so that we know how to phrase our message, how to package it, how direct we can be, and all these different things, right? And I think these are all very important leadership aspects at the same time. And we're going to go more into the communication piece itself in just a minute. But share with us first why you're so passionate about heart-centered leadership, and what is your definition of it even?
I believe that we all have a voice. And one of the things that drives me a little bit nuts is when I see people uh, shush the kids. They stop them asking why. Why is this? Why is that? And that's that curiosity that we're killing so early on. And we're kind of shushing them when they're little. And then later on, we are wondering how come they don't speak? Well, that's the reason, because they have been put down so many times that they're afraid to really speak. So that's why communication is so important. Everybody has a voice, but we as leaders, to be heart-centered, we have to listen. But we have to listen sometimes to more than just the words that come out, because a lot of times people may say one thing when they actually mean another. So if we're not attentive, we won't capture that.
Right. Listen between the lines.
Oh, yes,
Just as we want
absolutely.
to read between the lines. You
Yes.
also mentioned curiosity. I love that because I believe firmly that curiosity is an extremely important leadership trait as well. Now, we want to be curious in a respectful way, of course. However, I do believe that it's very, very important so we can find out what people are about, what their genius is, what their greatness is, and we
Mhm.
can inspire them to bring it out, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
A lot of times I have a lot of professionals that I deal with on a regular basis, and one of them in particular, her name is Tony Ann. She comes in and she goes, "I love coming here. This is my second home." And I said, "Well, tell me why."
Mhm.
She goes, "Because it's if you remember that show Cheers, when you walk in, everybody knows your name." But so listening, we've she's been a client of mine, I would say almost 26 years. And for somebody to wanna still be excited to be your client for that long, there has to be that synergy that is happening where they feel so comfortable that they come in and they tell you what's going on in their life. I was there when she gave birth to her child. She
Wow.
comes in every so often and she goes, "Look what my girl's doing. Look what Gigi's doing." And she shows me pictures and all these things. And then she tells me about her parents. So there's that, not only that professionalism, but it's crossed over in a very nice way where there's some personal attributes that cross over so that there's that connection and that community that we've built.
Wow. That's amazing. It's a great story.
Mhm.
By the way, I also had a very wonderful client named Tony Ann in the
Oh, there you go.
past, but she's not from the Long Island area, so it's probably not the same person.
Right, right.
Okay, so yes, our topic today, and you already mentioned trust earlier, is building trust through effective leadership communication.
Mhm.
I always say trust is the glue that keeps it all together. Yes, but it's also, of course, the fundament for any meaningful relationship and exchange.
Right.
Now, first of all, describe what effective leadership communication is to you. What's your definition or your description of that? And what are some of the essential elements of effective leadership effective leadership communication, sorry, before we go into the trust building aspect?
Right. So, for example, in one of the businesses that I have, I questioned one of my managers and I said, how is this client that we have? And they said, well, they spoke a lot. I said, so what did they say? Not much. I was like, really? I said, they spoke a lot, they didn't say much. What is that telling me? That they like to talk, right? But they have no real context to what their message is about. So I think effective communication as a leader is building that trust to let people know that the words I'm going to use are going to be effective. Also, sometimes less is more, and that is so true. And in this case, I said, so you mean more is less? Because they said so much, but you got so little out of it. And sometimes what happens is people go in circles. Meanwhile, they never hit the target. So a lot of times when we build that trust with somebody, we have to let them know, not first of all, that we hear what they're saying, but hearing is not enough. That's just hearing sounds. We have to actively listen to them in order to build that trust that I hear and I'm listening to what you're saying compared to blah, blah, like Charlie Brown's teacher, blah, 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 right? And it's important for us to understand that when we're in front of someone, we need to be present. if we're not present, and if we're thinking, oh, they said something, all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, the other day I was thinking, no, it's not your conversation. So I call them conversation stealers, right? If you and I are talking and you mention one thing, and all of a sudden I am there like thinking about the one thing you mentioned, and I'm no longer listening to you because I'm in my own head having my own conversation. And I think
Mhm.
that takes away from me being actively listening to you.
Yeah, and people try to sometimes skip ahead because they try to figure out what the other person's gonna say or what to respond next, right?
Mhm.
Instead of really listening before they do. Now, yes, of course, some politicians make a living from speaking very much and saying very little, right? It's
Yes,
also an
correct.
art. I always have to laugh when I hear that. I immediately think of certain people, but I'm not going to say
Mhm.
who.
Right.
Okay, that's my secret. Okay, so yeah, great explanation. And you know what I also love about this, and this is the second time at least that you're doing this during this conversation already. You answer with a story and an example.
Mhm.
And I think that is also a great communication technique and
Mhm.
tool, especially here for our podcast to make it more descriptive for our listeners who are really drawn into what you're telling them. That's at least what I believe this is doing right now. Okay, so that's beautiful. Now, why is effective communication so important for successful leadership, in your opinion? It might be pretty obvious to some of our listeners why it's so important, and to me, but I'm curious to hear what's most significant in this context for you, in your view.
Sure. I want to just before I answer that, I want to touch back on the storytelling.
Sure.
I think that when we tell a story, it kind of sticks, right? The information sticks a little bit more because people can associate, they can even envision what happened. So the reason I think communication is so important, the way we even go about it, is for clarity. And we talked about that earlier. I think that if we want something done and we don't come across as clear, for example, if we're giving instructions to someone, and it doesn't matter whom, but if the instructions are not clear, they're going to keep coming back with, what did you mean? Oh, did I do it right? Did I do it wrong? Is this right? Or what happens is, if your communication is not clear, they will come back with different results than you expected. If you say, this is what we're looking to accomplish, then, and these are the steps that we must take. Now, a lot of times that's also micromanaging, and we don't always want to do that. We need to know what their expertise is in, but then let them know that this is the end result we're looking for. Sometimes, and I've seen it 100 times, where I have a parent tell me, wow, my kid got an F. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, they got the answer wrong. I said, but it's actually right. I'm looking at because they showed it to me. I said, but the answer is correct. They got it wrong according to the teacher because they did not explain how they got the result. And they didn't do it the way the teacher wanted them to do it, yet they got the result. So what happens is, in life, we need the results as long as nobody's getting hurt in the process, right?
Mhm.
It has to come across to, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what has to happen. And then that way it's clear all the way across, and communication doesn't falter. There's no fails that we can go blame other people. And a lot of times leaders blame others, but they're not being critical as to the details of what they want done. And therefore they'll blame the other person for not getting it done the way that it was supposed to be done. And
Mm.
so that clear communication, I think, is extremely important.
Yeah, so they don't take their share of the responsibility.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, that is super, super important, of course. Um, let's talk about trust building through communication. Okay.
Mm.
So how does that come about? What are the elements that build trust in your view, from your
I
perspective?
think, yeah, I think that one of the things that we need to know is whom we're speaking with, right?
Mhm.
What's important to them. And then let's not step on their toes. I think one of the things is that we need to ask their opinion in order to build that trust. We need to let them know that we value their insights, their input. We value their point of view, even if we don't necessarily agree with it, right? Because we all have our own different thoughts, our different ideas. But one of the things that we can say is, help me understand. What do you mean by that? And the minute you share those simple words, you're starting to build a trust because you're not just taking it for face value. If we say, how can I help you? How can I help you do this project? How can I help you do these things? Or even, how can you help me?
Mhm.
Help me understand where you're coming from. Or before we blame someone for something, say, can you walk me through the process? Let me understand how you got there. And I
Totally.
think once we start letting them know that their value is critical, that they matter, immediately that trust starts building. But you don't do it just once. You have to do it consistently because consistency also builds trust.
Mhm. Yes, I think questions as such are often great tools to build trust. Well, as long as they are asked in the right way and the right questions, of course. But yes, they give us additional insights. They can clarity again, right? Clarify and avoid misunderstandings. And they can also make sure that what we heard is even what was said, because that's not always obvious either, and that's not always automatic. We all have conversational blind spots. We have
Mhm.
our fears, our emotions that cause those blind spots, and our brain automatically disconnects every few seconds from the conversation,
Mm.
and that's just something that we cannot avoid. This is how human thinking works. So we don't necessarily always hear every single little detail of what is being said. And we must
Mhm.
be cognizant of that. We must be aware of that so that we can address it
Right.
with questions, for example, right?
I think one of the things that we also have to consider is that if we don't have time when somebody approaches us and we say, we let them know that, hey, listen, I value what you have to ask of me, but right now, um, I'm I'm tight on my schedule, but can I get back to you? And then the follow-up, I think, also builds trust, not only for your employees, but also even for your clients. Follow up, follow up, follow up. But then be earnest with it. Also, if you say to somebody, listen, I'm going to be there at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or whatever time it is, be there because it's important that they know that they can rely on you. Now, if you're not going to be there at the time you said, reach out and reach out in a way and say, hey, listen, I got caught up. I got this happened, that happened. I apologize. I'll be there in, I don't know, 15 minutes, whatever it is. Or before you have to cancel, don't just cancel like 2 minutes before when somebody's been there waiting for you. If you have to cancel, at least do 24 hours.
Yes, whenever possible, right?
Mhm.
Yes, I totally also appreciate this comment. I have clients who sometimes just get drawn into or pulled into meetings short term. So understand I need to be flexible at
Mhm.
times. However, it cannot be a pattern. That's what's most important to me in that context, because if somebody's really in a bind right now, well, I get it. I'm not going to make them lose their session, even though
Right.
my agreement says 24 hours before, because I understand that those situations happen and it's not their responsibility in this case. However, it shouldn't be a pattern, and we can really be mindful about it.
Mhm.
Now, when we talk about trust building, well, for example, I studied a methodology that is called conversational intelligence, or CIQ, and it really helps us build trust in teams, particularly, of course, also with other stakeholders, right? But it's very focused on building trust in teams and navigating more successfully through those team conversations, also the challenging ones. And it's a lot about words, about using inclusive language and how to talk, when to use we, when to use I, and all these different
Mhm.
things. And we even have like a tool that is called the conversational dashboard, where we can sort of categorize people into specific levels of trust. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's very interesting because, of course, people are not necessarily in the same category in just any situation. It
Right.
changes
Mhm.
with the people, according to the people they interact with, and also according to their situation. It's really a great tool, though, to gain awareness of where my people and my team are. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about trust building, and what else apart from language do we build trust through in communication. Like, we talk about, of course, body language. I talk a lot about energy in this context, as
Mhm.
you know,
Right.
attitude, personality, presence, all these different things. So talk to us about that.
I think one of the things that we can touch upon also is habits, right? The habits that we have. We know how somebody's going to be acting based on the habits they don't even realize they have. Are they early? Are they on time? Do they get the project done? How do they treat other people? So this is how, and I love what you talked about, communication intelligence, because we do it automatically. We know, oh, Johnny's going to be late again, or Johnny says swear words, or Mary does this or that. So we automatically categorize people always, and it does it. Kids even do it, right? We all we have the most impressive computer in the whole world, and I would never trade mine for anyone else's, right? I don't want to upgrade. I think what the brain that I have given, this incredible mind of mine, just like yours, is unique to you, and
Mhm.
we have to consider it as a growth mindset so that we continue to learn all the time. So when we are thinking about how do we build that trust, it's through the actions, through our habits, the way we show up, right? If somebody has to keep reminding us that we are not showing up on time or dressed properly, or we're a little rude, or we don't come with, we always have we're like this, we don't have a smile. So those are some of the key ingredients that are going to help to build trust. It's it's the way you show up, the
Mhm.
actions you take, the habits that you foster. I think those are incredible to help to build trust, because people will actually run a clock by me sometimes. They're like, he's always there, he's on time, he starts on time. And one of the other things is, I if there's no end game, then we can just keep going and going and going and going.
Mhm.
But sometimes that's just more is less, right? We're just doing the same nonsense for no reason, when we should have a game plan. And I think having a game plan also builds trust.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. And I know that about you, that you're always on time. So I can definitely confirm this. Sifu Rafael is always on time.
Mhm.
And if he is 30 seconds late to a meeting because of traffic jams, then he apologizes. So yes, totally. And yeah, so you said how you show up. That includes, yes, some things that I mentioned as well, like attitude, personality, presence, and then it includes everything that you said, like habits, actions, right? It includes so many things. There's a long list. I don't know whether that list even has an end to it if we
Mhm.
actually go deep with it, right? So, um, what would you suggest to leaders who know that they need to improve their communication with their teams in some way? Where or how should they even start? Let's say it's maybe a not so experienced leader and they're in a new leadership position and in a new management position also, right? So we know that those two things are not the same, but often they go hand in hand. So what would you suggest? Where do they start?
This thing, right? This
Okay.
thing
You
is,
have to say what you're showing us because not everybody's
I'm
seeing
gonna
it.
tell you what I just held up. I held up a phone.
Okay.
I A lot of times I forget my phone. I forget it at work, I forget it at home, I forget it at one of my other places. And so what happens is no big deal. But for other people, oh my gosh, it is, their life is ruined. So I consider a telephone a great, great tool, but it is also a communication killer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you, it's an assassin because how many times, and everybody's seen memes where there's a family at a table and they're all on their phones. There's no verbal communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times when I pass by and I see people with their phones out, maybe two or three, four people, and it's going to be a conference that I'm at, and I'm like, hey, are you guys all texting me? I'm right here. And they look at me a little weird. But what happens is,
It happens.
all the time.
It
So
happens.
I'll see two
People,
people next to each other on their phones. And I said, hey, you guys are texting each other. Why don't you just talk? And they look at me and then I said, guys, I'm kidding. I said, but maybe you should try talking to one another because they're both so busy on their phones that they don't realize they're in the presence of someone that can impact their lives. When you're next to somebody, put that thing away. And one of the things that I realize is that a lot of people will have their phone, but they put it underneath the table, and then they're doing this,
yeah.
and then they're doing that. They're looking down. So what winds up happening is they might as well not be in the room. They should leave. They're taking up valuable space. So that is one of the things. As a leader, I would tell them, well, hey, everybody, do me a favor if we're having a conference. Do me a favor, everybody, just take your phones out, put them on the table. Great, thank you. And they're gonna go, okay. But also, I've been told by other people that putting your telephone on the table is not only a distraction, but is also rude.
Mm.
So the reason I say put all your phones on the table is so that we can all know that, hey, it's either you're going to listen to me or you're going to pay attention to that device on the table. And then the next thing I would say, can we all now take our phones, put them on airplane mode or anything like that, and I'll give you the phone number here. So if anybody, you can text anybody, there's an emergency, they can call the actual phone number
Mm.
so that we're not disturbed unless it's an emergency.
Mm. Yeah.
Because every one of you has something special to say. Maybe I'm leading the conversation, but if we're not attentive, if we're not present, then we might as well stand up and you can go.
Okay.
And that will definitely enlighten some people and say, hey, you know what? This guy, my new leader, actually wants to hear what I have to say. Boom. Automatically, you're building that trust. He or she wants to hear what I have to say. I matter. And I think for a new leader, they have to do something like that to let their team know that they matter.
Yes, sometimes doing something, as you just said, is more powerful than saying something, although that also involves words, of course, right? And what's also interesting is, yes, in the past, the telephone was actually only a communication tool. But then it got all those other functions, and now it's called a smartphone and it wants to be smarter than its users. So, yeah, it's definitely changed. So, now, how can leaders prepare for the more challenging conversations with team members? Like, for example, when they need to address performance issues. Okay, what are some ways for leaders to get their message across in a way that is less painful and that's also at the same time effective, so that can get the best results for their team and for that individual as well, right? In the sense of getting a win-win situation out of it, and avoiding that the person we talk to goes into the defensive, or they reject the feedback we are giving, or any of those effects that we do not want to get in those conversations. So how can we make feedback also more helpful through communication?
So one of the things I would say probably about 24, 25 years ago, I had a client who was having a difficult time. So
Another
what
story.
there you go.
Very
But
good.
this will bring it to focus what we're talking about, because
Uh-huh.
they've they applied it and it's worked fabulous for them. So they were having a difficult time with someone that worked for them. And they told me some of the stories, and I said, do you rehearse? They're like, what do you mean rehearse? I said, rehearse. Before you talk to them, before you talk to them about the issues that you have in mind, do you rehearse? They're like, no, I don't rehearse. I just go approach them and I tell them what's going on. And I said, but you keep having the same problems with them, yet you can't fire them. I said, what would happen? You kind of know them a little bit. What would happen if you verbalized it out loud, not read it, but out actually spoke the words, even in front of the mirror, while you're walking, while you're at home, while you're driving, and you had this conversation and and put them in the conversation. What would they say? How would they react to what you said? And then what would your comeback be? But don't do it once. It depends on how heavy the conversation is going to be. And I mean by heavy is the context, the seriousness of it. So they said, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. I said, no, you can't give it a shot. I said, you'll never do it. You know, like Nike came out with the best slogan ever, and I'm not promoting them, but the slogan is incredible. Just
Good.
do it. And so when we consider practicing a, a tough conversation over and over, and I said, you can't just practice it one time and let it go. I said, you have to come up, you have to practice it. If you're going to talk to them on Friday and today's Monday, you should have that conversation every day for a couple of minutes. How's it going to go? Do it again, change the scenario. How are they taking it? Are they happy? Are they angry? Are they mad? Did you surprise them with it? So all these different issues happen. They actually came back to me and they said, you know, I was able to be clearer with them.
Mhm.
My message was dead on, and it's exactly what I wanted to talk to them about. Had I not practiced, I might have fumbled it. Their reaction would have made me react in a way that would not have been good. They're still a client of mine. and they're still applying that technique.
That's
They,
great.
they even do it when they have to talk to their spouse, which is really great because they took it from a business concept. And now, before they talk something with their spouse, something, maybe they have an idea that they need to do with their finances or business trips or anything of that nature, before they just throw it on there, they reframe it in their mind. They work it out. So it's practice and work it out before you have that tough conversation.
That's a great tip. And what's also really important in this context is then to strike that balance of rehearsing and going with the flow of the conversation at the same time.
Mhm.
But what it gives you really is also to prepare emotionally and to show more emotional intelligence in that moment by, for example, being prepared for triggers and
Mhm.
this type of thing, because we all have triggers. We all have things that trigger us, whether they trigger us into anger or into impulsiveness, or whether they trigger us into fear, right? We all have those triggers, and some of them are worse.
Mhm.
So yeah, very cool. Yeah, so what are some resources for effective communication that you can recommend for leaders?
Well, definitely speaking prowess,
There you go.
one of the things. And Regina, you're putting a course together, and it's going to be an incredible course where you talk about how to communicate in a much deeper level as well. And I love it because your course is going to be so instrumental to someone coming on and understanding communication. And that happens with all the instructors who are on the panel, not only on the panel, but on the platform. So for me, I think that when we build something, we need to look at the best way, I think, is I got to be honest with you. You got to YouTube some stuff, but you have to do it with a fine comb because there's a lot of nonsense out there. Just like in anything on the internet, if you heard it on the internet, it's true, right? No, you have to decipher what is and what works for you, because you're going to see a lot of things that on the internet that are absolutely wrong, but it's up to you to decipher which is good. So sometimes you can go to just look up effective communication, look up different stories, look up different types of books, and there's so many different books there. You have books from, here's the crazy thing, children's books
Mm,
are great at communication. Why? Because they're totally story based, but they have a theme. So think about that. When you communicate, what is the theme of your communication? Look up any children's book, any fairy tales, any Greek mythology, anything of that nature. There's a story behind it. The Bible, stories behind it. So when we want to communicate better, I think that we have to find and follow great storytellers. I love watching speeches, and I'm not a political person, but man, do they're great orators. They speak so eloquently. Bill Clinton was one of them. The guy just, and I'm not talking politics, I'm just talking about the
mm.
person, right?
Well, it's their speech writers anyway, in the end.
Correct, correct.
So
But
it
even
doesn't really matter
after,
who the person is.
correct, but even after they're no longer president,
Yeah.
right? They actually speak because maybe they've read those speeches so many times, it
Mm,
kind of captures who they are. So when you think about somebody who's convinces other people to take action,
mm,
the reason they're able to take people from non-action to action is through stories, is through making them see. And I always consider faith, and I'm not talking religious,
mhm,
I'm talking faith and belief. because both of those things, you have to have faith that whoever's communicating is being honest and truthful, right? If you're following them. And then the belief is that what they're saying is going to actually happen. It's going to go to fruition. There's an end game and they speak about it. So I think that for us to become better communicators, we have to look at a lot of different people, read a lot of different books. I think reading helps you become a better communicator, right? Also depends on the kind of books you are reading, because if you're just reading textbooks on chemistry, then you're narrowing. But if you open it up and you read different stories, different ideas, even history tells so many stories, and a lot of them are true, and some of them,
Some are not.
some are not. I
In
was
the
going to say
history
that, yeah.
books. A
Oh
lot of
my
them are
gosh,
not in the history books. Yeah,
agreed. And a lot of, especially way back in the day before television or anything,
yeah,
it's the point of view. Who
mm,
wrote it and who saw it in that angle,
right.
right? Because even nowadays, you don't know what's real.
Yeah, yeah. Now, yes, and you mentioned politicians. You know, they're also many of them are great actors. So
Mhm.
I personally, you know, I have done a ton of research into what's behind all of this. So I, of course, you know, don't. I watch them for my studies, right? For my self-study, so to speak, but not to believe a word they say. And yes, it's a really interesting project to do that, right?
Mhm.
Because we can also learn a lot about how easily people are manipulated, and we don't want to use it to manipulate people, but we want to use it for self-awareness. I think that's the most important thing, and to also be aware of how everyone is conditioned and how careful we need to be about this, right? So we could
Mhm.
mention any politician almost at this point, and it doesn't make a big difference
Mhm.
because there's there's a lot more to it than we see at first sight. This is what I want to say, right? uh, so yes, absolutely, that is great content. So we've been going on for a while, and I know we could always go on forever. So we have so much to talk about. So thanks for
Mhm.
sharing all this wisdom that you have shared with us so far. Now, where can people find you?
Easy. If you go to Facebook, I'm Sifu Rafael G,
Hmm?
SIFU, and then I'm Rafael, RAFAEL, and then G, like go, right? And then you can also, that's my social handle, one of them, right?
Mhm.
But you can also go to speakingprowess.com.
Mhm.
And then that's going to be a platform that's going to, it's literally the way we're building it. It's going to blow everybody's mind because communication is everywhere. And the reason I see how important communication is for all of us is because you look at a person and they look polished, they look incredible until they open their mouth. And wow, things change. And then you can look at a person who does not look polished, doesn't look like they have much to say. But when they open their mouth, gold comes out. It is incredible. So never judge a book by its cover. Judge it by what it says, the words that come out.
Okay. And if you add the energy to it, see for Raphael, because the
Powerful.
energy sometimes speaks louder than the words. And
Yes.
so those need to be aligned, right? Because this is
Mhm.
again about authenticity and about transparency and about really ethical communication in a way, because that's when it's all aligned and when it makes sense and when we actually can build trust. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone listening. And thank you, Sifu Rafael, for enlightening us around effective communication for leaders and trust building in this context as well. I know there's so much more, as I said before, to this topic. And there's more that we can possibly cover in about 40 minutes. We're probably over those already. But this was an amazing start. And we can always continue talking about this in the future and then in another episode and explore maybe also some additional aspects of it.
I would love to.
And I
Thank
look
you.
forward to it as well. Thank you so much for being on. Thank you to everybody listening, and stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Rise to Lead. Keep shining your light, standing up for what's right, and inspiring others to step into their brilliance. If you like this episode, please give it a 5-star rating and subscribe to the Rise to Lead podcast on your preferred podcast app. Until next time, it's Regina Huber, and in the meantime, remember to rise to lead.